The year was 1971. The air in Arlington, Virginia was thick not just with the humid Potomac summer, but with a dense, clinging paranoia. The Vietnam conflict was a daily headline, a nightly argument at dinner tables across the Washington, D.C. metro area. The noise from National Airport was a constant reminder of the comings and goings of the nation's important business. But in the quiet, tree-lined streets of neighborhoods like Lyon Park, the real currency was silence and conformity. This was the world of Arthur Vance. Arthur, at 52, was the physical embodiment of the federal bureaucracy. He was a gray man, a term he had heard younger, brasher colleagues use with contempt, but which he wore as a badge of honor. To be gray was to be reliable, invisible, and permanent. For 24 years, he had worked at the Department of Defense, rising slowly but inexorably to the rank of GS-15. He was not a policymaker, not one of the action men at State or the spooks over at Langley. Arthur Vance was a senior logistics analyst. He managed procurement databases, analyzed shipping manifests, and wrote deeply unread reports on the efficiency of supply chains, specifically the complex billion-dollar chain feeding the war effort in Southeast Asia. He knew, better than most, exactly how many boots, beans, and bullets the machine required. His life was one of structured routine. He left the house at 0710, caught the 0722 bus, and was at his steel-gray desk by 0800. He lunched at his desk. He returned home at 1805. His wife, Eleanor, would have a highball waiting for him. Eleanor, a nervous, bird-like woman who volunteered with the Red Cross, managed the home with the same quiet efficiency Arthur managed his office. Their world was predictable, secure, and built on the unshakable belief in the American system. Then there was Thomas. Tom Vance, 22, was their only son. He was a product of the very system Arthur served, yet he seemed to despise it. A recent graduate of Georgetown University, majoring in political science, Tom was sharp, articulate, and deeply, profoundly angry. He had been on the periphery of the student protests, had argued fiercely with his father over the dinner table about the immorality of the war, the corruption of the Nixon administration, and the complacency of his parents' generation. Arthur dismissed it, as most fathers did, as youthful idealism, a phase that would pass once the realities of employment and a mortgage set in. But the phase was lingering. Tom, to Arthur's mild surprise, had secured a respectable job. He was a junior researcher at the Atlantic Policy Institute, a downtown think tank that produced white papers on strategic defense and foreign relations. It was the sort of place that provided intellectual cover for the policies Arthur helped implement. Arthur had been pleased. It seemed at last that Tom was getting with the program, yet the distance between them remained. Tom lived in a small walk-up apartment in Georgetown, preferring the authenticity of the city to the sterile suburbs. He visited his parents on Sundays for dinner, a ritual that had become increasingly tense, a minefield of unspoken accusations and ideological divides. Arthur, a man who organized the world through data and procedure, found his son to be an unsolvable variable, a walking, talking anomaly in his otherwise orderly existence. The initial signs were subtle, easily dismissed as the continued eccentricities of a young man finding his way in a tumultuous world. Arthur, a man trained to see patterns in data, initially failed to see the one emerging in his own home. He attributed the discrepancies to the generation gap, a term the popular magazines used to explain the chasm that had opened between parents and their offspring. Tom was part of the new generation, and Arthur, by default, was the establishment. The first data point was Tom's finances. Arthur, meticulous about taxes, still managed Tom's filings, a holdover from his college days. He noted that Tom, despite his modest salary as a junior researcher, seemed to have an unusual amount of discretionary income. When Arthur had questioned a series of small, regular cash deposits into Tom's savings account, Tom had been dismissive. "It's a research stipend, Dad," he'd said, a touch too quickly. "The Institute pays for off-book research, journal subscriptions, that sort of thing. It's nothing." Arthur, who had never received a stipend in his life that wasn't itemized in triplicate, felt a small ping of cognitive dissonance, but let it go. Then came the new social circle. The friends Tom had brought home from Georgetown were passionate, loud, and argumentative, but they were familiar. They were the sons and daughters of other bureaucrats, lawyers, and lobbyists. The people Tom mentioned now were different, more ephemeral. He spoke vaguely of a study group that met to discuss political theory. Not just Marx, Dad, but Kropotkin, Foucault. They were names Arthur associated with agitation, not serious policy. Eleanor, more attuned to emotional currents, was the first to voice a concrete worry. "Arthur, doesn't Tom seem strained to you?" she asked one evening, folding napkins for a dinner party they were hosting. "He's so thin, and his eyes, he never looks at you directly anymore. He's always looking past you." Arthur had grunted, deep in a report on fuel procurement for Da Nang. "He's 22, Eleanor. They're all strained. It's the times." But Eleanor's comment planted a seed. Arthur began to observe rather than just interact. He noticed Tom's new habit of secrecy. His son, who had once broadcast his every opinion, was now guarded. When Arthur asked a perfunctory question about his work at the Institute, "How's the analysis on the new SALT treaty proposals going?" Tom, who used to pontificate, would now stiffen. "It's just research, Dad. Mostly boring." Boring, Arthur thought, was not a word Tom typically used. Challenging, corrupt, fascist, yes, but not boring. The most jarring incident occurred on a Tuesday. Arthur had to leave the Pentagon early for a dental appointment. He arrived home in the mid-afternoon, a rare occurrence. The house was empty. He was making a cup of tea when the phone rang. He answered. "Vance residence." There was a pause, a click, and then a faint mechanical tone. The caller had hung up. Odd. The phone rang again, 5 minutes later. "Vance residence," Arthur repeated. A different voice this time, accented, but he couldn't place it. "Is this the line for Thomas?" "He's not here," Arthur said. "This is his father. Can I take a message?" The line went dead immediately. That evening, Tom did not come for his scheduled weekly dinner. He called Eleanor, his voice strained, claiming a last-minute deadline. Arthur stood by the kitchen doorway, listening to his wife's side of the conversation. "Of course, dear. Are you eating enough? We'll see you next week then." When she hung up, her face was pale. He sounded so far away, Arthur. Arthur looked at the black rotary phone. He thought about the accented voice, the click. It was an anomaly, a piece of data that didn't fit the established pattern. For the first time, Arthur Vance, the logistics analyst, felt a chill of genuine, unarticulated fear. His home, his sanctuary of order, had been breached by something he could not quantify. The discovery, when it came, was not a dramatic revelation. It was a slow, creeping realization, born of bureaucracy and domestic routine. It happened on a rainy Saturday in October. Arthur was in his home study, a room he cherished, organizing his personal files for the end-of-year tax preparation. He prided himself on his records. Every receipt, every bank statement, every warranty was filed, cross-referenced, and secured. Eleanor was at a Red Cross luncheon. Tom was, supposedly, at a research retreat with the Institute. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the drumming of the rain against the windows. Arthur's task was to reconcile a minor discrepancy in his property tax escrow. This required him to find an old insurance appraisal, which he believed was stored in a file box in Tom's old bedroom. Tom's room was maintained by Eleanor as a sort of shrine to a boyhood that no longer existed. Model airplanes hung from the ceiling. Georgetown pennants adorned the walls. Arthur felt a pang of nostalgia, a longing for the simpler problems of Little League and algebra homework. He located the file box in the back of the closet, but his search for the appraisal dislodged another, smaller box from the shelf. It was a simple, faux leather box, the kind used for storing high school medals. Arthur didn't recognize it. Curiosity, a rare indulgence for him, took over. He opened it. Inside, there was no medal. Instead, there was a small black spiral-bound notebook, the kind sold in any university bookstore, and a single key, attached to a tagless fob. He picked up the key. It was not a house key or a car key. It looked like a key for a high-security padlock or a post office box. He set it aside and opened the notebook. The first few pages were blank. Then, halfway through, notations began. They were not diary entries. It was a ledger, written in Tom's small, precise handwriting. which Arthur had last seen on college applications. The entries were cryptic, arranged in 3 columns. The first column was a date. The second was a short series of letters and numbers like a code, B7, P4A, R11. The third was a dollar amount, usually small but consistent, $50, $75, $50. Arthur's blood ran cold. He was a man who understood ledgers. This was a record of transactions. He flipped further. The handwriting changed. It became a list, not of names, but of topics. DoD fuel contracts, SE Asia, Q3 projections, shipping manifests, Cam Bay, spec, parts XYZ, Atlantic Insti. Internal memo, strategic reassessment of NATO flank. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. These were not public topics. The third item was internal to Tom's think tank, but the first 2, he recognized parts X, Y, and Z. They were specific highware components for the F-4 Phantom II. He had signed off on a report about their accelerated replacement schedule just last month. The information was classified confidential, not top secret, not the stuff of novels, but confidential. Information that, in the wrong hands, could cause serious damage to national security. He stared at the page, his analytical mind fighting his paternal denial. It could be a coincidence. It could be Tom's own research. But why the code? Why the ledger of payments? He turned to the last written page. There was a single entry, dated 2 weeks prior. Location, G Park, 14 miles. Item, Vance Sr., Psych Profile, Work Access. The status, pending. Arthur sat down heavily on Tom's boyhood bed. The model airplanes turned slowly, silently, in the draft from the heating vent. Vance Sr. That was him. They were building a file on him. He put the notebook back in the box, the key clicking softly against the cardboard. He replaced the box on the shelf exactly as he had found it. He located the insurance appraisal in the other file box. He walked back to his study, sat at his desk, and placed the appraisal next to his tax forms. He stared at the wall. The rain lashed the glass. His world, so ordered and precise, had just been fractured. The anomaly was no longer in the data. It was in his house. It was his son. For Arthur Vance, the following week was a masterclass in compartmentalization. On the surface, nothing changed. He left for the Pentagon at 07:10. He processed his reports. He listened to the departmental chatter, the complaints about the cafeteria food, the speculation about the upcoming Redskin season. He returned home at 18:05 and sipped his highball, discussing pruning the azaleas with Eleanor. But inside, a separate, cold and methodical process had begun. Arthur, the logistician, was now applying his skills to a new, terrible project, the surveillance of his own son. Denial had evaporated, replaced by a desperate procedural need for confirmation. He could not go to the FBI. He could not go to his departmental security officer. To do so would be to detonate a bomb in the center of his life, vaporizing his family, his career, and his reputation. If Tom was involved in something, a report would trigger an official investigation. The Vances would be persons of interest. Arthur's security clearance, the bedrock of his career, would be suspended. They would be ruined. No, he had to be certain. He had to understand the scope and nature of the problem before he could classify it. His first step was to observe. He used the pretext of needing to get a file from Tom's apartment to ask Eleanor for the spare key she kept. She handed it over without a second thought. He waited until the following Wednesday, a day Tom had mentioned he had an all-day seminar at the Institute. Arthur called his own office at 09:00, claiming a sudden stomach ailment, a rare sick day that earned him genuine concern from his secretary. He drove not to Georgetown, but to a hardware store in Falls Church, where he purchased a simple, handheld cassette recorder and a pair of low-powered binoculars. He felt absurd, like a character in a cheap spy novel. He let himself into Tom's apartment. The place was messy, bachelor pad standard. Stacks of books, Camus, Marcuse, a well-worn copy of The Wretched of the Earth, empty coffee cups, a lingering smell of old tobacco. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He was not a field agent. He was a file clerk, and this felt like a profound violation. He did not know what to look for. He checked under the mattress, in the desk drawers, in the freezer. Nothing. He felt a wave of relief. Maybe he had misinterpreted the notebook. Maybe Vance Sr. was a class project. Then, in the closet, tucked inside an old pair of hiking boots, he found a small leather pouch. Inside was a stack of $20 bills, perhaps $200, and a second key. This one was different from the one in the box at home. It was stamped with a number and the name of a public locker, the kind found at the Greyhound bus terminal. He put the pouch back. He left the apartment, locking it carefully. His next stop was the bus terminal. He didn't go inside. He sat in his car across the street for 2 hours, watching the flow of people. He felt the binoculars, heavy in their case, on the passenger seat. He couldn't bring himself to use them. This was a place of transience, of people leaving, not a place for espionage. He needed a new approach. The notebook had mentioned G Park, which he reasoned meant Glover Park, a quiet, leafy neighborhood near Georgetown. The entry had specified a time, 14 Anung. He decided to stake out the park. For the next 3 days, he took his lunch break at irregular times. He drove his government green Ford sedan to Glover Park, parking on a side street, and ate a sandwich. He watched. He saw dog walkers, university students, nannies. On the third day, he saw Tom. Tom was sitting on a bench, reading a newspaper. He looked tense, checking his watch. At 14:02, a man sat on the other end of the bench. He was nondescript, middle-aged, wearing a tan raincoat despite the mild weather. They did not speak. After a minute, Tom folded his newspaper and placed it on the bench between them. The man in the raincoat picked it up, leaving his own newspaper. A moment later, the man stood and walked away. Tom waited exactly 2 minutes. Then he too stood and left in the opposite direction. It was a classic brush pass, a newspaper swap. Arthur's hands were shaking so badly he could not put the key in his car's ignition. He had seen this maneuver in DIA training films, shown to new employees to warn them about Foreign Intelligence Service tradecraft. It was textbook. He drove back to the Pentagon, his stomach a knot of ice. The denial was gone, replaced by a terrible, clear-eyed certainty. The data was in. The pattern was confirmed. His son was meeting with someone. He was exchanging information. The notation in the notebook, Vance Sr., psych profile, work access, wasn't a research query. It was a tasking. They were evaluating him as a potential target. Tom was not just an informant. He was the vector. The discovery in Glover Park shifted Arthur's internal calculus from investigation to damage control. The problem was no longer theoretical. It was active, and it was escalating. The newspaper swap proved Tom was not a lone, ideologically confused kid. He was an asset, a cog in a machine, and he had a handler. The notation about Vance Sr. now felt less like an assessment and more like an imminent threat. They were probing Arthur's own vulnerabilities through his son. He had to act. He could not, he reasoned, live in a state of suspended dread. He needed to confront the source of the anomaly directly. He planned it with the same logistical care he would a DoD audit. He would not do it at the family home. Eleanor's presence would be a complicating variable. He would not do it over the phone. The line, he now suspected, might not be secure. He would do it on neutral ground, or rather, on Tom's ground, where the evidence was. He waited until the following Sunday. He knew Tom's routine: coffee and the Washington Post at his apartment until noon, then laundry. Arthur drove to Georgetown, parking 3 blocks away. He used his key to enter Tom's apartment building, the familiar sickness of violation rising in his throat. He let himself into the apartment. It was quiet. Tom was out. Arthur's gaze fell on the hiking boots in the closet. He retrieved the leather pouch. The money was still there. The key to the bus station locker was still there. He sat in Tom's threadbare armchair, the one facing the door, and placed the small numbered key on the coffee table. And then, he waited. An hour passed. Arthur's mind raced, building scenarios, scripting conversations, all of which collapsed into silence. There was no procedure for this. At 11:32, he heard a key in the lock. The door opened. Tom entered, a small basket of laundry under his arm. He saw his father and froze. "Dad?" Tom's voice was sharp with surprise, not guilt. "What are you doing here?" Mom said you were raking leaves. Arthur said nothing. He simply nodded toward the key on the table. Tom's eyes followed his father's gaze. He saw the key. The color drained from his face. His casual posture vanished, replaced by a sudden, rigid tension. He dropped the laundry basket. "What is that?" Tom asked, his voice a low monotone. "I believe you know what it is," Arthur replied, his own voice sounding distant, academic. "As you know what this is." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small black notebook he had taken from the box in his house. He placed it on the table next to the key. Tom stared at the two objects, the key and the book, as if they were venomous snakes. He looked back at his father, and for the first time, Arthur did not see his son. He saw a stranger. Tom's eyes were cold, assessing. The angry, idealistic student was gone. In his place was someone Arthur did not know at all. "You went through my things," Tom said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "I found these," Arthur said, holding his ground. "The ledger, the research on my department, the notes on the F4 components, the payments, the brush pass in Glover Park on Thursday. I saw that too." Tom's composure broke, just for a second. A flicker of panic. He had underestimated the gray man. "You don't understand," Tom stammered, falling back on the old scripts. "It's not what it looks like. It's about peace, Dad. It's about exposing the war machine, the things this country is doing." "Stop," Arthur commanded, and the quiet force in his voice silenced his son. "Do not speak to me of ideology. I am a logistician. I see data. The data says you are exchanging classified information, supplied by me, however indirectly, to an agent of a foreign power." "Who is he, Tom?" "The man in the tan raincoat. I don't know his name." "His name?" Arthur scoffed, a bitter, dry sound. "Of course you don't. Do you know who he works for? The GRU? The KGB?" Tom's face was white. "They're just people. People who want the war to end. They found me at the Institute, my research. They said it was good. They said I could make a difference." "A difference?" Arthur repeated. "And the money? Was that for peace too? And the key? What's in the locker, Tom? A radio? Cipher pads?" "It's just materials. Backup," Tom said, his defenses crumbling. "And me," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He tapped the notebook. "Vance Sr., psych profile and work access." "What was the plan, Tom? Were you supposed to recruit me? Were you supposed to get me to bring home more documents? Were you just the way in?" Tom had no answer. He sank onto the floor, his back against the wall, and put his head in his hands. The confrontation was over. There had been no shouting, no violence, just a quiet, devastating audit. Arthur looked at his son, the asset, the informant. "You have a handler," Arthur said, his mind clicking back into procedural mode. "And they have a contingency plan. When you don't show up for your next meeting, they will activate it. You have compromised yourself. You have compromised this family. You have compromised me." He stood up. "Get your coat. We need to go." "Go where?" Tom whispered, looking up. "To the park? To run?" "No," Arthur said, his face a mask of gray granite. "We are not running. You have made a procedural error. Now, we are going to file a report." The drive from Georgetown was silent. Tom sat in the passenger seat of the Ford, a void. Arthur drove with mechanical precision, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He did not drive home. He did not drive to the Pentagon. He drove past the familiar landmarks of his life, the monuments, the bridges, and headed toward Fort Myer, toward the anonymous, secure buildings that serviced the intelligence community. Tom believed they were going to the FBI. He imagined the public spectacle, the headlines, the disgrace, but Arthur knew better. The FBI meant Hoover, and Hoover meant publicity, show trials, and political theater. The Bureau was a blunt instrument. This situation required a scalpel. Arthur was not a spy, but he had worked at the DoD for 24 years. He knew the org chart. He knew the quiet corners of the bureaucracy, the places where problems were handled rather than advertised. He was not going to the FBI. He was going to the Defense Investigative Service. He parked in a visitor's space at a bland brick building that could have been a regional accounting office. "Wait here," he ordered. He went inside, to a desk manned by an armed service member. He did not show panic. He was Arthur Vance, GS-15, requesting a secure line to speak with an old colleague, a man named Frank Jennings. Jennings was not a friend. He was an acquaintance from the Interagency Working Group on Information Security. He was a man with the same gray pallor as Arthur, a fellow lifer in the system, but his job was different. Where Arthur counted things, Jennings counted risks. A half hour later, Jennings met him in a small windowless conference room. It smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Jennings was tall, thin, and wore thick-rimmed glasses. He looked like a high school principal. "Arthur," Jennings said, his voice flat. "It's been a while. You look peaked. What's this about?" "Your man at the desk said it was urgent personal business regarding Section 793. Arthur flinched. Section 793 of Title 18. Gathering, transmitting, or losing defense information. He had not used those words. The guard had, identifying the nature of the threat before Arthur had even spoken. The machine was already processing him. "Frank," Arthur began, his voice dry. "I need to report a potential compromise, a serious one. It's domestic." Jennings just stared. He motioned to the chair. "Hypothetically?" "No," Arthur said. "Specifically, my son, Thomas Vance. He's an informant, I believe, for the Soviets." Jennings' expression did not change. He did not register shock or pity or surprise. He simply reached into his breast pocket and produced a small leather-bound notebook and a pen. "Start at the beginning," Jennings said, "and do not omit a single detail. Your career and your son's liberty depend on your total, immediate, and unblemished cooperation." For the next 2 hours, Arthur recounted everything: the notebook, the financial discrepancies, the accented phone call, the apartment, the key, the brush pass in Glover Park, the confrontation. He spoke in a monotone, delivering his findings as if they were a quarterly logistics report. When he finished, Jennings clicked his pen closed. He looked at Arthur. "Where is the subject now?" Jennings asked. "In my car, in the parking lot." Jennings raised an eyebrow, the first flicker of emotion. "You brought him here?" "Arthur, you are a civilian. You should not have confronted him. You should not have moved him. You have contaminated the scene. You have alerted his handlers." "He is my son," Arthur said, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. "No," Jennings corrected him softly. "He is an asset, potentially a hostile one. As of this moment, he is a case file." Jennings stood. "Wait here, Arthur. Do not leave this room." Arthur sat for another hour. The silence in the room was absolute. He thought about Eleanor, waiting at home, wondering why he and Tom were late for Sunday dinner. He thought about the F-4 Phantom parts, the shipping manifests, his own file. The door opened. Jennings returned, along with 2 other men, both in identical dark suits. They did not look at Arthur. "Arthur," Jennings said, his voice now official, "your son has been taken into custody for debriefing. He is being transferred to a secure facility. You will not be able to contact him." "Custody," Arthur repeated, the word sounding alien. "It's a preliminary measure, for his safety and for ours. His handlers will know he's missed his report. They may attempt to extract him or to silence him. He is a liability, Arthur. We are containing the liability." "What about me? My wife?" "You," Jennings said, "are now a person of interest. Your clearance is suspended, effective immediately. You and your wife will be relocated, temporarily. A debriefing team will meet you at your home." "Debriefing? I told you everything." "You told me everything," Jennings said, "but you haven't told the counterintelligence team. They will want to know everything you've discussed with your son for the last 5 years. They will want to know if you were a witting or unwitting participant. They will want to know if you are the source." The accusation hung in the air, thick and toxic. "Frank," Arthur pleaded. "Go home, Arthur," Jennings said, his face unreadable. "Wait for the team. Don't use the phone. Don't talk to anyone. And Arthur, don't touch any more files. We will handle it from here." The exposure was complete. The system, the vast impersonal machine he had served his entire life, was now turning its full, cold, analytical gaze upon him. He had reported the anomaly, and in doing so, he and his family had been absorbed by it. The debriefing was not an interrogation, not in the sense of bright lights and raised voices. It was far more insidious. It was a bureaucratic procedure, a meticulous soul-grinding audit of his entire life. The team arrived at his Arlington home an hour after he did. Eleanor, already frantic with worry about his and Tom's absence, met them at the door. There were 3 of them, led by a man named Mr. Shaw. They were polite, professional, and utterly devoid of warmth. They showed credentials from the Defense Counterintelligence Agency, and Arthur, with a nod, let them in. "Mrs. Vance," Shaw said, his voice a soothing baritone, "your husband is assisting us with a sensitive internal matter. We need to ask you both some questions. It is a matter of national security." They were separated. Eleanor was taken to the dining room with one agent. Arthur was guided to his own study, a place of sanctuary now transformed into a holding cell. Shaw sat behind Arthur's own desk. The irony was not lost on him. "Let's start again, Mr. Vance," Shaw said, opening a fresh legal pad. "From the very beginning. Your son's political awakening at Georgetown. Every conversation, every argument, every friend he brought home. For 12 hours they went over it. And then, for another 12 hours, they went over it again." Shaw's method was one of relentless, repetitive detail. He asked the same questions in different ways, checking for inconsistencies, for the slightest deviation in the narrative. "Tell me again about the shipping manifests for the F4 parts, Arthur. Did you ever bring that file home?" "No, never. It's against all protocol." "But you discussed the delays with your son?" "No, maybe, in passing, complaining about work. The supply chain is a mess this week." "Something banal like that. He was my son." "He was also," Shaw countered, not unkindly, "an agent of influence. Did he ever ask you specific questions about your work?" "He asked me why I did it, why I supported the war machine. It was philosophical. I thought it was philosophical." "And did you, in your attempts to justify your philosophy, ever provide him with specific examples of your work, of its importance?" Arthur's blood ran cold. He remembered a specific dinner months ago. Tom had been railing against the waste. Arthur, defensive, had tried to explain the complexity, the necessity of the logistics. "It's not waste, Tom. We're keeping men in the field supplied. We're making sure they have what they need." Had he mentioned the F4 parts? The fuel projections? He couldn't remember. The conversation was a blur of righteous anger and defensive pride. He was not the only one under scrutiny. While he was being debriefed, a separate team, a technical team, was sweeping his house. They moved with silent, practiced efficiency. They checked the phones, the light fixtures, the walls. They went through his files, his immaculate records. Arthur, the man of files, watched as his life's work was sifted, bagged, and tagged as evidence. Meanwhile, in a different, undisclosed location, Tom Vance was undergoing a different kind of debriefing. Arthur was not privy to this, but Frank Jennings provided him with a sterile, need-to-know summary 2 days later. In the same windowless room at the DIS building. "Your son is cooperating," Jennings reported, sipping a styrofoam cup of coffee. "Is he all right?" Arthur asked. "He is all right. He is in a secure, comfortable location. He's talkative." Jennings consulted his notes. "It was the GRU, not the KGB. Military intelligence. They're messier. They targeted the Institute. Tom's handler was a cultural attaché named Victor Orloff. Tom was a dangle. He fed them his own analysis, which they liked, and then he started feeding them Institute gossip. Then they tasked him. "What does your father do?" Jennings looked at Arthur. Tom was, in their parlance, in development. They were grooming him to be a vector, to gain access to you. He passed them the unclassified analysis of the F4 parts from your dinner conversation. It confirmed their own intelligence. That made him valuable. His next task was to acquire your psych profile, your habits, your vices, your weaknesses. "Vices?" Arthur said hollowly. I have no vices. Exactly, Jennings said. Your weakness, according to their assessment, was your son. They were right. There would be no trial. Jennings explained this with bureaucratic patience. A public trial would expose the Institute's vulnerabilities. It would expose the DoD's own internal family problem. It would be an embarrassment. So what happens to him? Arthur asked. Prison? Jennings shook his head. He's too valuable, Arthur. He's young, he's American, and he's already established contact. He knows his handler. He's in a perfect position. A position for what? We're going to turn him, Jennings said simply. He's not a Soviet informant anymore. He's our informant. He's going to become a double agent. He will feed Mr. Orlov exactly what we want him to feed him. His cooperation in this is non-negotiable. It's this, or he faces a sealed indictment for treason. The system was not discarding the anomaly. It was integrating it. Tom Vance, the idealistic student, was gone. In his place was case file 447B. The immediate consequence of the containment was silence. Tom was gone. The debriefing teams left, taking with them several boxes of Arthur's personal files, his sense of security, and the last vestiges of his authority. The house in Arlington, once a sanctuary of order, now felt hollow, contaminated. Eleanor did not handle the void. The official story, crafted by Jennings' office, was that Tom had been selected for a special classified government program, requiring immediate relocation and no contact. It was a cover story so thin it was transparently false, but it was the one they were ordered to use. Their friends in the neighborhood, other government families, understood the subtext. The Vances were in trouble. Invitations to dinner parties dried up. Eleanor's phone calls to her Red Cross friends were met with polite, brief excuses. She was isolated, adrift in a sea of unspoken suspicions. She began to drink her highballs earlier in the day. She stopped leaving the house. She would sit in Tom's room, the model airplane still turning in the draft, and just wait. Arthur's aftermath was one of bureaucratic purgatory. His security clearance was not revoked. That would require a formal, appealable process. It was instead suspended pending review. This review, Jennings assured him, could take years. He was not fired, he was reassigned. On a Monday morning, Arthur Vance, GS-15, senior logistics analyst, reported to his new office. It was in the sub-basement H of the Pentagon, a windowless beige room full of decommissioned metal desks. His new job was to oversee the archival digitization project. In essence, he was to manage the transferring of 20-year-old shipping manifests from paper files to microfilm, a task of such profound, mind-numbing pointlessness that it was clearly a punishment. He was a gray man assigned to the grayest of tasks. His former colleagues avoided him. They knew. No one said anything, but he was a pariah. He was the man whose son had something. He was the man who had brought the spooks from DIS down on their department. He ate his lunch alone. The system he had devoted his life to had not cast him out. It had simply moved him to a non-load-bearing position. He was a file, marked hold, in a cabinet in a locked room. The only contact with the real world came from Jennings. Once a month, Arthur was required to report to the DIS building for a status update, which was, in effect, a low-level continuation of his debriefing. Any unusual contact, Arthur? Hang-up calls? Anyone seem to be following you? No. Have you spoken to anyone about the situation? No. Good. In one of these meetings, Arthur gathered the courage to ask, "My son, how is the project?" Jennings looked up from his file. "The asset is performing within expected parameters. He has re-established contact with his handler. Orlov has taken the bait. We are currently feeding them a very compelling and very false narrative about new submarine-launched missile capabilities." "Is he safe?" Arthur asked. "He is managed," Jennings replied. "That's all you need to know. The personal cost was total. The Vances, as a family unit, ceased to exist. Arthur and Eleanor lived in the same house as polite, traumatized strangers. The $1 million war machine Arthur had analyzed on paper had become a deeply personal, intimate force. It had identified a weakness in his own home and had, with surgical, passionless precision, excised it, taking his son, his wife's sanity, and his own career as collateral damage. Years dissolved into a decade, then more. The world that had defined Arthur Vance began to dismantle itself. The Vietnam conflict ended in a chaotic televised retreat. Watergate shattered the nation's faith in the executive branch. The 1970s, with their paranoia and stagflation, bled into the 1980s, with a new, more aggressive anti-Soviet posture. Arthur remained in his basement office, microfilming the past, while the world above him prepared for Star Wars and evil empires. He was a relic, a tenured ghost in the machine. Eleanor's decline was steady. The nervous strain, as the doctor called it, eroded her. She passed away in 1982. The official cause was a coronary event, but Arthur knew she had perished from a lack of information, a life lived in a suspense that never resolved. He buried her, took a week of bereavement leave, and returned to the microfilm. Then, in 1989, the world broke. The Berlin Wall, that great concrete symbol of the binary world Arthur understood, crumbled. He retired the following year. He was 61. He was given a small, formal party in the basement office. A younger, ambitious GS-12 gave a short speech about Arthur's long and steady service. He was given a commemorative plaque and a government-issue pen. He went home to the silent house in Arlington. He spent his days organizing. He organized his files, his pantry, his garage. He created a perfect, orderly system, a fortress of procedure against the chaos of memory. In the winter of 1991, the Soviet Union itself, the great monolithic adversary, voted itself out of existence. The Cold War was over. A month later, a letter arrived. It was not a bill, not a circular. It was a personal letter, the stationery a pale, unfamiliar blue. The postmark was from Ann Arbor, Michigan. He opened it with his silver letter opener. "Dear Father, I am writing this letter with the permission of the committee that has managed my life for the past 20 years. As of December 26, 1991, my utility has been deemed concluded. My case file is closed. I am living in Ann Arbor. I have a new name, though they have given me permission to share it with you. I am a teaching assistant at the university, finishing a doctorate in Russian history. I am, in their words, deactivated. I know it is too late for apologies. And I know you, better than anyone, understand the nature of the systems we were both a part of. I would like, if you are willing, to see you. Thomas." My new name is David. David Sterling. Arthur sat in his study for a long time. He reread the letter. David Sterling. A new name, a new file. He booked a flight to Detroit. He met his son in a coffee shop on the edge of the University of Michigan campus. The man who sat across from him was not Tom. This David was 42, with a receding hairline, wire-rimmed glasses, and the same weary, analytical eyes as his father. The anger of the youth was gone, replaced by a profound academic exhaustion. They did not embrace. They shook hands. "David," Arthur said, testing the name. "Father," he replied. They talked for 2 hours. They did not talk about 1971. They did not talk about the GRU, or Victor Orlov, or Frank Jennings. They did not talk about Eleanor. Instead, Tom, David, talked about his doctoral thesis on the structural failures of the Soviet economy. Arthur talked about the new metro line being built in D.C. They discussed the weather. It was a conversation between two men who had been processed by the same machine, two components that had been retooled and set on different shelves. As Arthur was leaving, standing on the snowy sidewalk, Tom said one final thing. "All those years, Dad, I was feeding them what our people wanted them to hear. I was good at it. I became a trusted source. And I realized I wasn't changing the world. I wasn't exposing anything. I was just a file. A file in their cabinet and a file in ours." He looked at his father. "We were just data, weren't we, all along?" Arthur nodded, adjusted his scarf. "The system requires data to function. That's all it is." He turned and walked toward his taxi. Arthur Vance returned to his house in Arlington. The trip to Ann Arbor had provided a conclusion, but not a resolution. It was the closing of a file, not the healing of a wound. He sat in his study, the plaque for his steady service on the wall. He reflected on the great game he had stumbled into. It was not a game of heroes and villains, of black and white, as the politicians claimed. It was a game of gray men. It was a war fought by analysts, by file clerks, by logisticians. It was won and lost in the margins of reports, in the discrepancies of a ledger, in the interpretation of a whispered comment at a dinner party. He thought of his son, David Sterling, a man rebuilt from the raw material of Tom Vance. And the system had demanded Tom's cooperation, and in exchange it had given him a new life, a new identity, a new purpose. The system was pragmatic. It did not care about morality or family or ideology. It only cared about utility. Tom had been a useful tool, first for the GRU, then, more effectively, for the DIS. He thought of his own role. He had been presented with an intolerable anomaly. His son was a traitor, and he had reacted in the only way he knew how. He had followed procedure. He had reported the anomaly to the proper authorities. He had chosen the system over his blood. What was the alternative? To become a co-conspirator? To let the GRU develop him as a source? That would have been a betrayal of his entire life, of the principles he had built his identity upon. He had done the right thing, the patriotic thing, and in return, the system, to thank him for his loyalty, had taken everything. It had consumed his son, driven his wife to despair, and relegated him to a bureaucratic tomb. He was a patriot, and he was a pariah. He realized the true, cold nature of the world he inhabited. The Cold War was not a conflict between two ideologies. It was a conflict between two rival bureaucratic systems, two vast, impersonal machines designed to manage information and human assets. And he, Arthur Vance, had been a perfect, willing gray cog. His son's words echoed in the silence of the study. We were just data. Arthur pulled a fresh legal pad from his desk drawer. He picked up his pen. He began to write in his small, precise hand. He was not writing a memoir or a confession. He was creating a new file, a new system. He began to catalog, from memory, every book in his house, organized by subject, author, and date of acquisition. It was a large, complex task. It would take a long time. It was the only thing that made sense.